Thanks so much, Ms. Voss. Thanks, Mr. Gross. Thank you also for inviting me. I allowed myself to be inspired of this wonderful picture of Laura Patchett, the construction traces of the Reich Autobahn between Fulda and Würzburg. So, the title, Nature in the Middle Ages. We want to examine this term in the stress field between belief, biology, and power. And we will begin with power. So, who coins this term? Who appropriates? Who dominates whom? Who uses whom? Who protects whom? The humans, nature, or does nature protect the humans? And the power relations, ladies and gentlemen, in the Middle Ages, they couldn't have been clearer. In the Middle Ages, every child knew that nature has more power. Its power was undisputed. Thunderstorms, lightnings, inundation, earthquakes, pandemics, heat. People were exposed to all that, and they knew this and they felt this very clearly in their bodies, and that more frequently than we do today. But it continues, and here you see a text where you can read this up, namely the miserableness and the exposedness to all the evils. But it continues. And still, in comparison with nature, humans were just a pile of miserable beings. So this is a quote. God formed the human from earth, the lowest of the elements. The planets He made of fire, air from ether, fish from the birds and water. And humans and the animals were created from the earth. If the human being looks at the animals, he feels inferior. He feels most inferior when he looks at what came out of the fire. He cannot compare with the stars in the sky, nor dominate what is moving on the earth, because he sees everywhere that he is equal to animals. So in comparison with the elements, the planets, the animals, human beings are at a disadvantage. And this is clear when you compare infants with each other. Newborns, weeping, weak, and little. We just are little different from crude animals to which we are inferior in terms of their capabilities. Some can walk right after birth. We, in contrast, even if one raises us to our feet, we cannot walk. And also, we cannot walk on our hands. And now, what is even worse, ladies and gentlemen, it's possible to go even worse. So we look even worse if we compare ourselves to herbs and trees. The flowers, they have leaves and fruit, but humans only lice and worms from plants. We can harvest oil, wine, and balm, but you have just other excrements. Those are smelling nicely, but you are stinking. And the fruit on the tree show that a good tree can only give good fruit. So it couldn't be clearer. The bad nature of people and the bad balance does not become better if we take a look at what people do. They climb across fences. They climb on mountains. Also, they overcome cliffs, mountain ranges, and don't let themselves scare off by underground walkways. And you can read that yourself. The impression is as if someone was pulling the leg of current leisure activities, paragliding, canoeing, deep-sea diving, desert tourism. And this amused tonality also resounds in the following enumeration of technical achievements. The humans fell trees, work wood, create fabrics and clothes. They build houses, go hunting, So there seems to be a radical cultural pessimist here who is asking why humankind has at all an interest in surviving. So no matter what they try, the human's nature is always having overpowered. So you may ask who writes that and why I tell you this so early in the morning. After a coffee, all of us seem to feel a bit better now, but these are not news we usually read after 9 o'clock in the morning. So should we worry about the mental health of this author? Is he maybe depressive or in midlife crisis? Has he been at a disadvantage in his life? Complicated childhood. 1194 is the year this text was written. Lothar von Segni, a young lawyer at the Roman Curia, cardinal, deacon, very successful in his early 30s. He already became a member of the College of Cardinals, so no reason at all to be in depression or midlife crisis. And then in 1198, he became the Pope, Innocence the Third. This is him who succeeded his prior Pope in 1290. So what he wrote here is not very original, but it is a florilegium of traditional knowledge in the tradition of antique philosophy. The smallness and lack of power of humans in the face of nature. Interestingly, this thinking tradition also in Enlightenment, among others with Herder, found a continuation. The term of the human being as a defective being accompanied that discussion, the lack of natural instincts, which make persons imperfect compared with nature. And so the necessity to compensate that lack, that in the end of the day gives birth to what we call nature. So, very nice. It's like the bells of a church from time to time. It's 9:59 now. So, and the idea, and this is a very interesting theory, the idea of humans as a defective being, Anno Marquardt, turned that into the history of human culture and history as a compensatory process. We could discuss that in the discussion because in this tension, in this stress field of imperfection of people, this term came about. So the power relationships were very unequivocal. The nature had the greater power. And in this context, here's another interesting proposition, at least on a transitory basis. This only changed with the invention of the surge arrestor in the 18th century. The lightning arrestor, its invention in the 18th century, this was the moment basically when nature was basically harnessed in its overpower. Nature was, human was no longer defeated. The humans had found ways and means of arresting its power, both for the ships. I mean, this was one of the biggest problems in navigation, that ships were hit by lightnings. But also this violence of the thunderstorms. And Luther also started with the thunderstorm, with his conversio, in the face of a huge thunderstorm. So this break point in the 18th century is called by some a decisive date. The invention of the steam engine followed soon. And humans thereby was said to have gained power over nature. So this is a proposition we might want to discuss. Let's move on to the second point, biology. Who dominates, who uses, who protects? Now on the question of the use of nature as a resource. And now about the rules of biology. Now, survival, and this is the next proposition, in the Middle Ages was clearly only possible with and not against nature. We know the problem. Nature basically cannot be privatized in the sense of being used by private persons, at least only to a certain degree. This is a problem we are facing today in a very urgent way. Mountain meadows, oceans, groundwater, atmosphere, rainforests, all these are assets we can only use together. It doesn't help if I don't contaminate the groundwater in my garden. And it also doesn't help if I keep the atmosphere above my house free of CO2. All these resources can only be used together by us. They are owned by all of us, and they can only be managed and used in a meaningful way together. Now, the big question mark is that at all possible? This shared sustainable use of natural and joint resources, is that possible? A topic we are looking into very much today, and a topic most of us also think they have an answer to subliminally. So there is some original truth on our minds. It's called the tragedy of the Allmende. We know that's that term. It is a proposition Gerrit Hart expressed in 1968. No, it was not the 11th century. And it is logical. Why? What is used by everyone is neglected by everyone jointly. So what is used jointly is also neglected jointly. And this is in line with what we have experienced. Think of the office. Everyone wants to have a cup of tea, but no one repairs the tap once it's broken. No one washes the dishes. So what is used by everyone is also neglected by everyone. However, and for that, history has also supplied some examples. It causes irritation. It is disconcerting. And this disconcertion is what I want to illustrate with one very concrete example. It is about the resource of the sea, namely about the Lake Constance, the so-called Swabian Sea. This was a resource in the Middle Ages, a classic case, actually, of Hardin's tragedy of the commons, the Allmende, as we call it in German. The fish population, of course, provided a renewable but limited resource. There was no lack of incentives for intensive utilization or overexploitation, and more and closer meshed nets, for example, would bring clear advantages to individual fishermen. The lake was neither privately owned nor was its utilization regulated by a central overarching authority. Rather, the use of the lake and its shores was shared for centuries. The monasteries of St. Gallen and Reichenau, and here we have stated all of those on the shores, the Prince Bishop of Constance, the Cistercian Abbey of Salem, the Counts of Nellenburg, the Counts of Tettnang, and so on and so forth, all had their estates and the shores of the lake, and they leased this land to fishermen in the villages. And close to the shores, everyone had access to the lake. Everyone could use it. So how did the fishermen of Lake Constance manage to utilize their lake as a collective resource for centuries without destroying it? This question has been researched by the Trier historian Michael Zeheter in his very comprehensive doctoral thesis. At first glance, the answer sounds trivial. The user community organized itself. Representatives of the participating communities met regularly, at least once a year, at the so-called Fisherman's Day. The current state of affairs was discussed there, the climate, demand, and the status of the various fish populations. The rules for the coming year were adapted to the respective situation and laid down in fishing regulations, because there had to be adjustments so that the respective year could be used appropriately.
Yeah.
Here you see these regular ordinances which were designed and drafted.
Yeah. So.
And these fishing codes were rewritten time and again. Altogether, we know about 34 fishing codes and fishing contracts from the years 1350 to 1774. There are even more. Zehiter actually evaluated these, and some of the ordinances and regulations have changed considerably over time, while older researchers read these constant changes as proof that they did not work. But today, they see this, in fact, as a secret of success. That is, if normative texts are applicable and have to be amended all the time, they thought this means they did work. But today, researchers, like I said, have turned that around. So it's visible that this adaptability of these codes was actually the secret of the success of the fishermen. Flexible adaptation was crucial, as every change was a reaction to changing conditions. Once a rule had proved its worth, it could remain valid for centuries. Other rules were adapted again and again. What, for example, was done when the stock of Lake Constance of a certain species of fish, for example, the whitefish of Lake Constance, if the stock declined, what happened? Now, for the year in question, the mesh size of the nets was made compulsory for everyone. So the mesh size was increased, so more fish could emerge again, and juvenile fish were not caught in the nets, but instead came to spawn. So what did that mean? Of course, losing income. So one dispensed with short-term gains in favor of long-term usability of the system. It's also called internalizing externalities in the language of enterprises. Also, conservation seizures were identified, restrictions on a catch, and what was essential was the regular adaptation of the system. No laws set by the state and valid forever, but flexible adaptability to the usage and usability of the system. Many of the decisions would today be described as sustainability measures, and many of the decisions meant foregoing short-term profits. However, this was accepted in favor of the long-term usability of the lake. In business terms, this is known today as the internalization of externalities, like I said, and that these rules were of general application. This was, of course, the prerequisite for sustainable use of this resource, that is, sanctions. They were very important as one factor of the functioning of this model. That is, this interplay of natural variations and the richness and partly also abundance nature had in store for the humans. So, this is what I wanted to say on that example of Lake Constance. Now, what do we do with the tragedy of the commons? The findings Michael Zehenter looked into are relatively well in line what a colleague from economy has found out. She mainly looked into game theory investigations. Elinor Ostrom is her name. She investigated how people organize to solve community problems together and how to solve issues of using nature together. So what rules do they set themselves? What influence have incentives on decisions, mutual influences? What role does communication play? And her results of her research are shown in brief on this slide on the right-hand side. The most important lesson for public policy analysis derived from my intellectual journey is that humans have a more complex motivational structure and more capability to solve such dilemmas, posited in earlier rational choice theory. People are capable of the cooperative use of collective resources, common goods. And this is the short version of her conclusion and the result of these long-standing years of research of Elinor Ostrom. Over decades, by the way, she also looked into fishery and how fish breeding grounds and water reserves were handled. That was all investigated by her, and she found out that peoples have a high measure of capabilities for self-organization. The prerequisites to such self-organization, this consists in the interest of these people who use nature. They have an interest in not just eating something today, but also tomorrow or next year. And also their children and grandchildren were also supposed to continue to operate their fishery businesses. And in this context, Elinor Ostrom's research, and in 2008 she actually received the Nobel Prize for her research, so she's not just someone, but a very important economist. So basically, this is in line with the findings, namely the historical analysis is in line with what Elinor Ostrom formulated in 8 laws, so to say. These are the prerequisites for the functioning of sustainable uses of resources, of natural resources. Minding the time, I would leave these 8 rules for discussion. They are boundaries, coherence, decision-making ability, monitoring, sanctions, conflict resolution mechanism, and recognition and embedding. Also, I want to say that Thiele de Moor also went into very interesting research of the early modern period. And I'm now moving on to my last one. I've still got 4 minutes, right? Belief. The subject of belief, is a bit vague. We translate it by religion, and I just want to formulate which we may call a doctrine and which may be subliminal in our nature about the Middle Ages and nature, namely the question about the role of Christianity for the development and attitude to nature. And thereby, I move on to Lynn White, most quoted ecology historian of the 20th century, I think. He published, and we're now not in the Middle Ages, but in the 19th century, that is in 1967 at Science, he published an article about the historical roots of our ecological crisis, a fascinating text which shows the urgency of the ecological problems of modernity and sheds light on that from a historical perspective. The religious stories of Judaism and Christianity and also Islam, namely the creation, the Old Testament mission of reigning over the planet. This was the reason for the ascension of the Occident, and also the great diversions in the end of the day, as the Why Europe discussion. We here relate to the fact that the West, with its technical development in the 17th and 18th century, just left the rest of the world, especially Asia, behind it. And the question is, who's responsible, or what is responsible for the West reigning over the rest of the world, that they founded colonies, exploited them, destroyed nature, caused globalization and environmental pollution being exported everywhere. So Lynn White, in his paper from the year 1967, focuses on the cultural factors that enabled this development. To be specific, the relation between religion and ecology. And the sentence of gain the reign over the earth, dominium terra from the Bible, Genesis 1:28, you will know that sentence. This was taken as a basis. Subdue the earth, the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals on earth. In Christian Occident, less so in Orthodox Judaism and in Islam, this mission was taken seriously, and it led to subjugation of nature through technical progress. While arguments from the perspective of the technical historian that the Occidental Christianity was responsible for the relationship between man and nature, leaving its balance. The formerly animist religions, which had respect for the nature, and in every cloud or bush they saw a soul, these have been replaced by the anthropocentric religion of the Christianity. So much on White's proposition. A very interesting starting point, especially because White turned around the popular knowledge of his time, because in 1967, when this paper was published, Christianity and the Catholic Church were regarded as the main obstacle on the way to the future, as an inhibition of progress, as an institution that forbid all developments into the future. And this is why Lin's thesis is proposition rather, is very interesting, because he said the contrary. Christianity was an engine of progress, but also responsible for merciless subjugation of nature. Still talking about this proposition, I also want to say that he did see some light at the end of the tunnel. One in the Middle Ages, Holy Francis, one exception, a counterpole, a Christian antidote, an appeal to stop exploiting the nature rather than the will to domination. Francis preached mutual agreement with nature, sings about the sister moon, brother wind, sister fire, preaches to animals, and Laudato Si. You know this wonderful sun song. And White, interestingly, ends his paper with the proposal of making Francis the holy for the ecologist. And the Pope in 1979 followed. Francis was actually nominated the patron of the ecology. So for these propositions, Lin, and thereby I conclude, Lin had been criticized a lot. He was reproached with, while being an expert for technology and economy, hadn't got an inkling of religion and religious science. Maybe that was exactly the reason for why he had such a clear view of these things, clearer than his contemporaneous people. So today we have a critical view of many of these things. Research has moved on. The myth of the link to nature of animist religions was disenchanted. For example, since Joachim Radke's pioneering work, the environmental history has opened up a lot, and Lynn White's propositions have been shed light on from a different perspective. Still, there's one thing: how we deal with nature and relate to it. It depends a lot on beliefs, on religion, less on religion in the sense of an institution, but on the inner convictions a society has. It may be more about doctrines, about sentences, so to say. Religion is important, I would say. Doctrines are important. Beliefs, knowledge we have, and we may call tacit knowledge. Convictions you just have without knowing. And one of the doctrines of modernity, since the invention of the lightning arrester, was certainly the belief in the ability to reign over nature. Lightnings, mountains were successfully fought against. We also democratized airspace so that we can now fly Ryanair for 50 euros. And with Ariane 6, there was the Virgin flight a few days ago showing that also the cosmos was conquered and can be developed as a further market space. So reign over the earth, subdue the earth. So eliminating nature only becomes a doctrine in Anthropocene. Enlightenment, and here's a quote of Descartes, declares humans the maître of nature. The humans, after being at the helm of evolution, only then became popular. Here's a quote from 2009. Human of today is the top of evolution. This is what we have on mind. The Middle Ages were modest. Humans were not the crown of creation. God's reflection, yes, but a reflection that acted in awareness of its own fragility. Survival in the Middle Ages only worked with nature and not against nature. Thank you for your attention.